most of your opportunities, in business and in life are the result of someone saying something good about you. They're only going to say good things about you. They like you, they respect you, you treat other people well. You can be really good at your job. You can be really smart. You can have a lot of the success attributes. But if you don't have those things, people aren't going to go to bat for you. Fortunately, some people said some nice things about me, and 22 years later, here I sit.
It takes very strong leadership, high character, highly competent people in important positions to make a difference, to change the course of something.
How do we build something that's sustainable and good? What are we valuing when we're making these decisions, right? And I think that's a big part of the culture and who you are. It's not just sort of what you're doing, it's why.
Rich, man, it is awesome to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
So I want to start with Celtic pride. You're the president of the Boston Celtics. Like, what a cool job. But at one point you said, I want the Celtics to be an organization of people who care. Whatever it is you're doing for the organization, I really want you to care about it. That is what Celtic pride is about. And I can't, as a leader, I can't expect that of other people if they can't see it from me. What does it mean to you to have Celtic pride and to care?
I grew up here, with the Celtics, and Celtics always meant something to me. I was coming up in the 80s with the Bird Big Three teams, won a couple championships. It was the Celtics were something that made you proud to be from Boston. And the Celtics always represented something bigger than just a sports team, starting with Bill Russell and Red Auerbach, all the way through, to Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown today, and Brad Stevens and Joe Mazzulla. And I've always felt a certain, I've been proud of to be from Boston and sort of from where the Celtics are from, if that makes any sense. I can remember when I was younger, I'd travel anywhere other from Boston on the Celtics, and I always felt like that was part of the civic pride here. And I always had that feeling, and my biggest goal is to have all our fans sort of share that feeling, right? That they're proud of their team. And in order for that to happen, we've got to instill that pride in the people who work here, and you've got to hire people who sort of have that in them to begin with, and who do really care. And it's important to them to be part of something that's bigger than themselves and kind of give themselves to that. And I think that's such a cool part of our culture. It's really our marketing tagline in the last couple of years in the playoffs has been different here, but it is what makes it different. If you're working for the 18-time world champion Boston Celtics, that's different than working for any other team in sports. And it's not to diminish any other team in sports. It's just something that we feel really proud of. We want our fans to be proud of. We want every person who steps into the organization to feel that they're a part of that, and that's something special.
What is it about Boston that's different? You different here, you mentioned, is the marketing tagline. I assume a lot of meetings and smart, creative people went into coming up with different here. What is it about Boston that's different?
It's in your blood here. It's sort of like you're born into it. It's not a choice. You're born in the Boston area in New England, and the Celtics, the Bruins, the Red Sox, the Patriots, they're just like a big part of the culture of the city. And it means so much to the people who live here. And it's pretty much all walks of life. It's not just people who would identify themselves primarily as sports fans. And it is part of the civic pride of the city. And people do care more about it. And that brings a lot with it, good and sometimes not so good, right? Because it's passion. And you don't win 100% of the time. And it's not easy to be sort of the one of 30 that's standing at the end of every season. But it's great. It's what fuels you. It gives you that energy. And when you step into the Garden on a playoff game night, like we'll be doing, for Game 2 tomorrow night, you can just walk in and you can feel the energy. And it's not like some arenas where it builds throughout the game. It's like, no, our fans, they show up and they're chanting before they're in their seats, and it just builds from there. And it's such a cool thing to experience and be a part of. And I think if you've done that, you say, oh yeah, it is different here, because I've been to every arena in the NBA and I've yet to find one that feels like ours.
So there's good and bad that comes with that. I know this as a guy who lives in Ohio, because Ohio State football fans are probably have some similarities to Boston fans. Kirk Herbstreit, a fellow Ohio guy, him and I went to the same high school. Him and the Ohio State fans got into some fights this year. He called him the lunatic fringe at one point because of some of the craziness that went on. So I do I see some of this. Yeah. How is that both on the good end and the bad end? Now, you've had a lot of the good end, right? Because you guys win a bunch. But how has it been for you over the course of your career with all the pressure and the winning and losing that comes with being at a place like Boston?
I mean, I think the big thing is it beats indifference. Yes. Right? And so you accept it. And I think you're feeling the same pain that the fans are feeling. If I wasn't a fan, I wouldn't be in this job. And I try to tell people this when they come through the door. Someone says, well, once you work in sports, you stop being a fan. I'm like, that can't happen. You have to think like a fan. You have to feel, you don't make your decisions, but you have to be able to understand the fan's perspective. You have to be able to accept it, good and bad. Now, in between the fans and you is the media. And the media doesn't always represent what the fans think. They've got their own sort of take on things that they're trying to feed to the fans. And so you have to discern between what the media is saying and what a fan thinks and how they feel. But you've got to be tuned into it, and you've got to be okay with it. And I think, where you run into trouble in this city is where you're not accountable to it. And you're not willing to sort of stand up to it and take the heat when it's coming, whether you feel it's justified or not. You can't be defensive about it, because really, people care. Like, that's really what you're dealing with. It's like people are passionate, they really care about this, and therefore you got to take it back.
I want to dig into your personal career, because it's really cool. As I was reading up on the fact that you had a prior job, a role as a VP of sales and business development, and then you leave this high up job with a big company to then move over to work with the Boston Celtics. Can you go back to maybe tell a little bit of your career arc and that story from how you got some of those big jobs prior to the Celtics, and then how you made the move over into sports?
Yeah, it's not the usual path, that's for sure. I had a 15-year career in tech prior to joining the Celtics. And I was fortunate. I was coming up through the ranks when before there was an internet, before there was a World Wide Web, before people even were emailing each other. And my first job out of college, I went to work for a company called NCR Corporation. They recruited me out of college. They put me into a high-tech sales training program with 80 kids from universities across the country, out in Dayton, Ohio, as a matter of fact, and taught us how to be professional salespeople. I started college when I was 17. I graduated when I was 21, and I was out in the world selling like multi-million-dollar computer solutions and networks to Fortune 500 companies, to people twice my age who knew a lot more about the product and the technology than I ever did or was interested to learn. But it was such a great foundation. Everything in my career sort of was easier after that, was built off of that. And as my career evolved, I started to get a little bit closer and closer to what was more personally satisfying for me, that was more fulfilling. So I saw this internet technology coming up, and I was on the business-to-business side. I was more interested in the business-to-consumer side. I was on the hardware side. I was more interested in the software side, because software is a little bit more of an art than hardware. And then, seeing how the internet was being deployed in businesses, I could see where it could be deployed, commercially in the world, and started to catch on to a couple of different companies who were, ahead of the curve on that. And so I went to work for a small startup company. I think I was like the 8th or 9th employee. Did that for a bunch of years, learned every aspect of the business. And then I sort of stepped up from there. And the company I worked for before the Celtics was a company called Lycos. It was a first generation search engine before there was a Google, before Google was a verb. And I met the group of people who were running this company. I interviewed with them a couple times, and they would only interview me on weekends because they didn't have any time during the week. They were like that driven, not pushing it that hard. Um, and it just appealed to me, the technology, the product, the consumer facing nature of it. And I could see how it was, I'm not a visionary, but I could clearly see how this was going to change people's lives. And it was just a matter of time before kind of broadband internet penetration into households caught up with it. And when it did, it just all went boom, And so it was a first generation internet company. It's a big success. It just so happened that the lead investor for the Celtics, a guy named Wick Grossbeck, who's still our team owner and CEO, and he put together an investor group to buy the team. But prior to owning the Celtics, he was a partner at a firm called Highland Capital that was a seed capital company into Lycos, where I had worked. So while I didn't know Wick, and we had sold Lycos, and I took a self-imposed year off, said I'm not going to work. I'm just going to reacquaint myself with my family, stop traveling, sort of decompress a little bit. I was about 7 months into it, and the phone rang one day, and it was Wick. And he said, "Hey, Rich, I don't know if you've been following the Celtics, but I just put together an investor group to buy the team." I said, "Oh, yeah, I've been following it closely. I'm a huge Celtics fan." He's like, "Well, I've been in 3 meetings this week, and your name came up 3 times. And on the 3rd time, I figured I'd just pick up the phone. I'd ask for your number, pick up the phone, and give you a call and see if you'd be interested in, in taking a look at what we've got going on at the Celtics." And this was probably 2 months after he bought the team. And I said, "Well, geez, I think I can find the time for that." It was such a unique opportunity that I needed to take a look at it. But, I was kind of a made guy in another industry, right? So there was an opportunity cost kind of walking away from that. But he said, "Why don't you come down and take a look, meet the team down here. Tell me what you think of them. If best case, you decide you want to get involved. Worst case, maybe do a little consulting for me, and I'll flip you some playoff tickets." And it went from there. It was pretty easy when I got invited. Before I said yes to the offer, I got invited into a game, and it was Michael Jordan's last game in the Garden. And after the game, I got invited to present him with a gift, a piece of the parquet floor. And I'm like, I could probably get used to this.
Wow.
So I took a leap, but it was a leap because it was a mom and pop shop at that point in time. It wasn't nearly the business that it is now, but it was too unique an opportunity for a Boston kid not to want to go do it.
Wait, how would the Boston Celtics be a mom and pop shop?
Well, it was interesting in that I would say there's about 40 people. Everything was on paper, nothing. There was no customer database. There was no
back in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
There was no notion of proactive, outbound demand creation, sales and marketing. There was no notion of sort of invest to grow. And actually, that was part of what made it really attractive, because you could see the opportunity. And there were good people, by the way, But what had happened was the team was really run through the CFO's office. And, the owner would take money out every year. It was a profitable business. It wasn't a bad business, but it wasn't a business, as I once in the Celtics, the business of Celtics has to be raising banners. That's what it is. And we're pretty far away from that. And you can say, well, you wait until the team gets good, or you got to get lucky in the draft lottery. But that's not a strategy. So you could take a look at it and you could say, well, this is one of the greatest brands in sports. They hadn't won anything since '86. So it had atrophied. The '90s were a tough decade for the Celtics. The sort of the premium that the brand once had, it faded a bit. And the mentality had kind of set in that, I remember talking to people saying, well, it's not, it's not a Celtics town, it's a Red Sox town. I'd say, well, wait a minute. Last time I checked, they play baseball from April through October, and we play basketball from November through April. We've got monopoly on professional basketball in our region, and it's the Celtics. This can be a bigger, better, smarter business than it is. And that's not to discredit anyone who came before. It was just sort of the way it was. And, so we sort of instilled a little different way of thinking about the opportunity invested in the product, which is, step one. If you're not investing, you're not going to grow.
What do you think it was that made three different people bring up your name to Wick?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about that because when I talk to younger people about kind of career, because I helicoptered in, it's not the usual path. Start as an intern and work your way up. I think a couple things. One, I love basketball and was a basketball junkie, and they knew I loved the Celtics. But two, and I think it's the most valuable advice I sort of try to give people, not that, I'm the great dispenser of advice, but most of your opportunities, in business and in life are the result of someone saying something good about you, and they're only going to say good things about you if they like you, they respect you, you treat other people well. You can be really good at your job. You can be really smart. You can have a lot of the success attributes. But if you don't have those things, people aren't going to go to bat for you. So I think, I found out who the people were who, had given me a reference. And I was like, wow, that made me feel great because those were the people who built Lycos, who hired me to come on, and I helped them grow that. And so it came around in a way that I wouldn't have expected, because you're really lucky if your passion and your career can come together. Most people don't get that opportunity. And people always say to me, "Oh, you got your dream job." And I'm like, I never dreamed of it. I never thought it was possible, right? It just didn't ever occur to me. I wasn't on the track. But it was a good sort of lesson, fortunately, some people said some nice things about me. And 22 years later, here I sit.
Wow. So now let's get into to some of the details of your role. So you're president of the Celtics. So how much of that, and I know this is different, probably team by team, sport by sport, how much of your job is let's make a bunch of money? And how much of your job is let's work with Brad Stevens and the coaches and the players and help be a part of building a great team? Like, I'm curious about what your day-to-day looks like and how much of both of those elements you're working on.
Yeah, it's mostly the business side. It starts with revenue, right? So I think where you want to be in sports, if you're doing things the right way and you're, have a little luck, where you're running a strong business, which allows you to generate a strong top line that allows you to invest in your product. Your product is your team and your players and all the supporting resources around that team and those players. And if you do that well, generally speaking, player payroll correlates with success. So you've got to be able to run a strong enough business to fund a strong player payroll. At least, in the NBA, that's certainly true. And that correlates with success on the court. And if the team wins, and if you're able to accomplish that, the team wins, then that drives the business. And it's kind of a virtuous cycle. So while I spend the bulk of my time managing a couple hundred people who are really good at their jobs on the business side, a good example is tomorrow I'm going out to meet with a couple of our owners and Brad Stevens to go through sort of a bigger picture view, long-term view of, of basketball and a bunch of, things we're thinking about and decisions we're going to need to make in the offseason, things that, I can't get into. But generally, my role with Brad is to help him think through this, right? Because he's a coach. He was a coach. He's a smart person. He's a thoughtful person. Got all these success attributes. But these are you sort of look at a lot of these decisions, and they're all balancing short term with long term. They're balancing, opportunity cost to do this, and that cuts off your ability to do this, and this. So you got to be right about this. How do you make this decision but still leave yourself some optionality and some flexibility so that you can keep getting better and you're not stuck? And that's all problem solving. And I kind of think business in sports, a lot of it is problem solving. So I'm not involved in Joe Mazzulla's game planning, but I'm involved in understanding what he thinks he really needs, to have a championship caliber team and trying to make sure he has that around him, and more of my involvement is at sort of the higher level when we're making big decisions, whether it's, trades or free agent signings, transactions, and sort of think I've got opinions on players and talent. I can't resist that. It's big, that's why I'm in the business. But that's not the expertise, that is needed from me. It's how do we build something that's sustainable and good, and what are we valuing when we're making these decisions, right? And I think that's a big part of the culture and who you are. It's not just sort of what you're doing, it's why, and so I'd like to think I help us think through that a little bit. And really, it's interesting because the sports side of it has grown so much. I mean, our team photo used to be, 12 players, 4 coaches, the owners, me, and the general manager. Now it's like 60 people in it. And it's an army of coaches and strength and conditioning people and rest and recovery people, nutrition, mind wellness, everything it takes to sort of like optimize performance. And that's building an organization and building an org structure. So I spend a good amount of time with basketball side and sort of how to do that, not telling them how to do it, but sort of being a sounding board for it, bouncing things around with them, and then there's obviously the budget costs, because everything, always, inevitably ties back to money. And we've got to think through all of that together, again, short-term, long-term. And so that's sort of the area of overlap there. And so I keep an office in both places, but most of my time is spent with the business group for sure.
So I'm also curious about your relationship with ownership. And we can get into the recent sale in a second, but prior to the sale, right, you mentioned the ownership group recruited you. They wanted you. How much freedom do they give you with the budget? Because it's ultimately their money, right, that you're going to spend more of to invest in extra coaches or support or players or luxury tax. I mean, there's a million different things that you, how do you guys manage a budget in a multi-billion-dollar business where it's not just about the money, because you want to win, right? You want to win games. Like I think the Warriors and others have gone deep into the luxury tax in order to get the players they needed to win. I mean, that's part of basketball at times. So how do you guys have, what's that relationship like when it comes to money and trying to win, but also trying to make money for your owners?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, that's really the crux of it all. It really is. The Celtics, the business of the Celtics is to win NBA championships and raise banners, right? So that's a pretty clear North Star. Now, you're not going to do that every single year. You don't want to delude yourself into thinking that. You want to be very realistic. And when you're in a window, when you're able to, for us, it's not about profitability. It's never been about profitability. It's been about winning. And the good news about the NBA, if you're running a team, if you're a well-run team, you can win and make money. But there are certain years where you're guaranteed to lose money by winning, because in order to win at the highest level, as you referenced Golden State, as our team currently, is way into the luxury tax, and the repeater tax is coming, and the first and second apron. And but what we've done is we've run a business that allows us to do that, because you're sort of you run a financially successful enough business, then you can fund losses for a period of time. You can't do it in perpetuity, but you can decide to do it for a period of time. And the great thing about our ownership is, when I tell you I've been here 22 years, I've never had a conversation with anyone in our ownership group, particularly my boss Wick and Steve Pagliuca, who's been involved for years, about how do you make more money for me? How does this team make more money? It's got nothing to do with that. It's like, how do we, ideally it's how do we win and not lose money? But if winning means losing money, then we'll lose money. And my job is to sort of help fund that. And then also say, well, at a certain point, we've got to make some decisions, because it's not always going to be sustainable. And it's not because the owners are saying, well, we're cheap, we don't want to pay it. It's because you run into not just financial penalties, you run into basketball penalties now with the new CBA. So you lose draft picks, you get assets that are frozen. You really can't continue to improve your team. So what you do is you sort of limit your ability to get better, and that'll cost you in the long term. It's been a good situation for me personally because I've been given the freedom to just do my job and do, and try to build this thing. And you get that when the results are there. But the ownership group has been really good. It's a very supportive group, a supportive board. Not questioning, why are you spending it on this player? It's more, okay, how do we win, and what's it going to take? And if that means spending a ton of money, then we spend a ton of money. And there are some years when you could just say, listen, we're not there now. We've got to reload. We've got to rebuild. And you sort of duck under a little bit so you can then move forward again.
Well, and also the asset grows really well, and it's specifically for this ownership group, right?
Yeah.
I think you correct me if these are wrong, but I believe they bought the team in 2002 for $360 million and just sold the team for $6.1 billion recently. Not bad.
Yeah.
Not a bad investment in growth over 20 years.
Well, yeah, and particularly when they didn't buy it for that reason. I think they're all smart investors. A lot of the investors in the group are private equity people, venture capitalists. They sort of understand, they bought a kind of undermanaged asset, plug in the right people and invest in it and watch it grow. But yeah, I mean, professional sports franchises, NBA sports franchises have beat just about any market index you could imagine over the last 20 years. And the good news, I feel, and I think this is, our ownership group, they've been paid back in love of the game and joy, being a part of it, winning a couple championships, like having it become such a civic asset, such an important part of the city, so important to so many people, and being a part of that, having restored that, and all the enjoyment of it along the way. And then at the end, you poke your head up, and you're like, oh yeah, by the way, we can sell this thing for a lot too. But I can tell you that's not what drove the sale. It was, and I'd tell you right now, most of the people in the investor group would say, oh yeah, I'd leave the $6 billion on the table and keep enjoying the team. I'd make that trade. At some point, whenever it gets traded later, it'll trade for more. So yeah, it's turned out to be a really good investment for some people who really enjoyed it along the way and got their payback in championship parades.
Well, yeah, I mean, as a sports guy, I don't know if there's a cooler rich guy thing to do than to own a team. I mean, like that would be the ultimate, is that you get to have one of those franchises. And that's why I'm sure big part of the reason that they cost so much, right, is because the supply is so low. A team rarely comes for sale because it's such a coveted thing to have. And then the Boston Celtics go for sale, and you're like, wow. And that's why it breaks records in all franchises. What was your role throughout that process after they announced you win a championship, and then they announced, hey, we're open to potentially selling this thing? And a year later or less, it goes through. Like, what's your life been like through that process?
Yeah, it's been busy. It's been like having two full-time jobs. I'm not complaining, but it's been a lot. What we've had to do. It's one of the things that it has made me think. We rarely look backwards. Like, you don't look backwards at the previous 21 years. You look at the next year. Like, we're always like, how do we get better? How do we win? How do we win? How do we build a better business so that we can sustain winning? And the job, with the sale of the team has kind of been, I guess, for lack of a better term, packaging it up. And that meant going back to 22 years of financials and presenting those out, and there's the way we run the business operationally. And then there's a way that an investor, private equity people, investment bankers look at an asset, and you sort of have to say, how do we take our business and run it through this filter so that the people who are the potential buyers can understand it, right, and see it in a language that's familiar to them. Like, this is how I value assets, this is how I buy assets. But ultimately, and you said it a minute ago, it's really not what it's worth, it's what someone's willing to pay, because it is a rare asset. It's whether it's you want to compare it to an original work of art that's famous, or beachfront real estate, of which there's only so much. It's a scarce asset and one of the greatest brands in sports, globally known. And so our job was to kind of show all that, and not only that, but also demonstrate the future growth potential. No one wants to think they bought something at the very top and there's no upside on it. And so we spent a lot of time sort of framing what we think the future looks like for the NBA, as well as the Celtics, and where our growth is going to come from in the future. And so it's been a lot of work. It's really been, but I will say, at the advanced stage of my career, you don't have a lot of, I guess, what I'd call really new learning experiences. And this has really been an interesting learning process to go through. And then it's been, really cool. And I never thought of this, because my mind doesn't really work this way, to sort of look back and say, wow, when we bought it, this is what it was, and sort of look at it now. It's not just the difference between what it was bought for then and what it's sold for now. It's like, holy smokes, look at everything we did here, because you just generally don't take the time to go back and say, well, we did this 5 years ago and it was incredible. Then you look back over it all and you're like, wow, this is, something you can feel proud of. And I think a big part of it, for me, I've talked about, sort of it being meaningful. You're kind of stewarding it for a period of time, right? It's sort of cliche to say, well, it's not our team, the fans own it, not us. Well, they do. It's that it really is for the fans, and it doesn't exist without them. Without the support of the community, we can't do what we do. And so it's been pretty cool to say, yeah, during our time here, we've stewarded this thing from here to here, and we're, I'm hoping to be around, but whenever that ends, you could look back and say, wow, we left this better than we found it. And we've kind of restored that, what the Celtics really mean to people.
Well, much like Wick recruiting you, he understood that it takes very strong leadership, high character, highly competent people in important positions to make a difference, to change the course of something. And one of the hires that you were, at least I assume, part of, I don't know how much a part of it, that fascinated me at the time was Brad Stevens. He was coaching right at this. I live in Ohio, so he's right next to me in Indiana at Butler, right? Not at a big school. Probably had opportunities to go to bigger schools, but never did. Also, I believe a former medical sales guy, so maybe you guys have a little kinship there, that you have some sales skills developed earlier in your career. But that was a strategic bet, right? That was betting on potential. That was betting on the future. He had never coached in the NBA, and you along with your general manager at the time, and I assume ownership, decided to make this big bet. Like, what was that process like to hire someone who was unproven in the NBA, who was young, who had never done it before, and you have him coach the most storied franchise, one of the most storied franchises in all of sports?
Yeah, this will be a bit of a long answer, but it was interesting. We once ran a sort of an analytical study to try to understand what coaches really had an impact on winning. Because everyone will say, it's a talent league. You got Michael Jordan, you got LeBron James, you got Larry Bird, you got Kevin Garnett, you're going to win. But we tried to, run a regression to understand really what coaches and what characteristics of coaches would most, be most reliable in projecting future success. And there was really only two things that came out of it. You couldn't really predict individually a coach. You could predict that if a coach had already previously won Coach of the Year in the NBA, then they'd still be a good coach and they'd still have success. And you could predict pretty reliably that if a coach was coming from college into the NBA, they weren't going to be successful. And it's partly because if you think, you think back to a lot of the, I don't want to call them old school coaches, but, these coaches, these huge names in college basketball, it's about the coach. It's less about the players. It's who's the coach, and that's who and that's the name that sticks, because the players turn over every 4 years, every 1 year now. And that didn't lend itself to going into a players' league, right, and being as effective. Um, Danny Ainge, who was our general manager at the time, was a wonderful, smart, competitive, just awesome guy for me to work with. I'm really lucky. I've had two partners in this business, Danny and Brad, and they're just world-class people. But Danny said, we knew Doc Rivers was leaving. We started a bit of a search, and he was kind of coy about it. He didn't talk about Brad at all throughout. And then we got to it. He goes, well, I think I got a guy like at Butler. And I was like, oh, Brad Stevens, yeah. I mean, I knew he took Butler to the Final Four. The Davy and Goliath, against UConn and Duke, he always struck me as a smart, thoughtful guy, but only from a distance. And the story is Danny went down to a Duke Butler game. Steve Pagliuca, one of our owners, is a Duke guy, and Danny looks at Steve and goes, "There's the best coach in college basketball." Steve says, "Oh, Coach Gay," and Danny goes, "No, the other guy." And so we zeroed in on Brad, and it was really Danny taking a risk, interestingly, have you ever been to Hinkle Fieldhouse?
Mm-mm.
It's where Butler plays. It
Yeah.
is like field of dreams for basketball. It is just this exposed brick on the inside, glass wall where the light comes like streaming through the glass onto the court. It's just like I walked in. I didn't go until last year when the NBA All-Star game was in Indianapolis, and I went to see Butler play Creighton. But I walked out of there, I was like, oh, no wonder it was so hard to pry Brad out of here, because he's a guy, it wasn't about money for him, So, it wasn't about power. And, he's enjoyed like having more resources, to be able to say, oh, let's, I've got resources to go figure out a lot of these things that I wanted to figure out when I was in college. I think to get Brad, it had to be same thing, sort of purpose-driven thing, like the Boston Celtics meant something to him. He's from Indiana, the cradle of basketball, Larry Bird country. And I think he got it, and so we were lucky because I know some other NBA teams had nibbled around with him before, and he just wasn't interested, and then the timing was, I guess, right for whatever reason for him to do it. I think he'd probably done most all of what he could at Butler. He probably could have had any college coaching job in the country. Probably could have had half the coaching jobs in the NBA. So we're lucky we got him. And I think with Brad, it was a comfort thing. It wasn't splashy. Oh, we're going to make you famous. We're going to make you the greatest coach in the world. It's like, no, your family will love Boston. You'll come here and you'll feel it the way you feel it in Indiana. I wasn't the person giving that recruiting pitch. That was, Danny. And we're really lucky that we got Brad, because not only was he a great coach and a great basketball mind, he's been so great for culture. He's such a kind person. He really cares about people. He's humble. He's self-aware. He's got great communication skills. Treats everyone with respect. No pretense. Just all these qualities. And been around professional sports. You don't, on the talent side, you don't always see that. And so he's been special and different. And people always ask me, how could you go from being a coach to being, the president of basketball operations and be so successful? And how did you guys know? It's like, well, Brad's got the attributes and traits that are going to make him successful no matter what he's doing. If he stayed in business at, I think, Eli Lilly, he'd probably be the CEO, or he'd have some very big job there. I think whatever he was going to do, because he works hard, he's prepared. Like he doesn't, he does things the right way. And so I don't know what he'll, hopefully he retires with the Celtics, but whatever he does next, he'll do great at that too, and he will.
You, as mentioned, hiring is such a big part of being a leader, especially a leader at the top of an organization like you're at. You regularly need to be surrounding yourself with excellent people that uphold the culture, that are innovative and do big things to help the company grow. What are some of the must haves? Like, what are some of the qualities and attributes in a person for you to say, yes, I want to promote them or I want to hire them to be a leader within my organization?
Yeah, I think, you look at what are the non-negotiables, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think, work ethic has to be there. If you don't have a strong work ethic, at least from my perch, I'm probably not going to see as much value. I think I mentioned self-awareness. You really do have to have an understanding that everything you do impacts other people. And you have to be aware of your impact on other people, good and bad. And you have to be able to, um, and I don't know what the right word is, but you have to be able to sort of customize your approach based upon whatever constituents you might be dealing with. So for me, if it's a senior, if it's our chief marketing officer or chief partnership officer, people I've been working with for 20 years, I can go shorthand. I can give it to them straight. I don't have to couch anything. I don't have to, you know. But if it's a young person in their first year here, I want to make sure I'm encouraging and I'm helping them feel good about themselves and getting their growth. And so I don't know how you'd sort of describe that trait, but you want people who kind of get that because my job is to hire the other leaders in the organization, right? Occasionally I'll meet an entry level, hire during the hiring process. But the other thing I sort of always look at is like, you want people who are like they're catalysts, they're positive energy givers, right? They give good positive energies to the group, to the organization. And I just think when you're coming to work every day, you're picking your ass up, on a Friday morning after a Thursday night loss, and you're going to come in and you can hang your head and you can be tired and grumpy, or you can be the person who, kind of helps people get up, and feel good. And I really look for that kind of spark in people, who you think, all right, these are people who kind of inspire other people. Doesn't matter what seat you're in, you can do it from anywhere. But the other people tend to gravitate towards those people because they make other people feel good. And so you look for that. And then the other thing is, we talked about it earlier. It's purpose. If people are purpose driven, I just think you get so much more from them, and they have so much more to offer. And I would say, like, I'm looking for people who give a shit. Like, whatever it is they're doing, I don't care what the job is, what the role is. Like, they're really going to care about what they're doing and really want to do it well because they've got pride in it. That Celtic pride thing we talk about, and it's not something you have to instill in them. It's something that they kind of have, and I think it's important, particularly in what we do, because the Celtics mean a lot to a lot of people, and I'm not trying to overly romanticize it. It's sports. We all know there's a superficiality to some of it, but on the other hand, people do really, really care, and you can lift people up. You can give people joy doing this, and you want people who kind of like they like that. They want to be part of that. They want to make that happen, and so I don't necessarily have a checklist, but these are the kinds of things that kind of catch my attention when I'm, talking to people or thinking about someone as a future leader, someone who's maybe not running a group now in the organization, but who could be. And those are the people I spend most of my time thinking about. It's like, okay, there's these sort of however many of them, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, who are going to be the future leaders of the Celtics. They're going to be the C-level people. When I'm on a beach somewhere, and the rest of the senior team is, and it's sort of like, what are the attributes you're looking for there, and that's the fun. I think that's really fun when you can actually see it in people, and you can see that they're going to get there if they've got enough support and a little bit of help. So Yeah,
I,
that.
I
Yeah,
noticed, yeah, it's
but
so good. I noticed this. So I went to one of your games earlier this year when you played against the Cavs. Cavs are having a great year,
yeah,
and it was in Cleveland. I got there really early. I like watching. It's maybe weird, maybe it comes from my dad, but I like watching how people prepare for things.
yeah.
And I noticed this little guy that didn't, to me, he wasn't wearing a uniform yet. It didn't look like he didn't look like an NBA player, but he was shooting. He must have shot a billion threes before the game. He was upbeat. He was bouncing around. He had rebounders who were like acting the same way. Like when you talk about work ethic and you talk about catalyst and positive energy and you talk about like really caring for your craft, it was Peyton Pritchard.
There you
And I
go.
just noticed like this guy shoots. I honestly like he was shooting forever, and he had this. He wasn't like he was taking it serious, but he was also having fun. It seemed like and serious at the same time, as well as his rebounders. He also like made them all basically. And then he gets in the game and he did in the game what he does in practice. And it to me, it's just like God. It is just it's inspiring to me to see. He wasn't the only one, by the way, but it was inspiring to me just to see a guy to care so much to prepare so that when he got his moment, because he's not a starter, right? When he got his moment, he was going to make the most of it. And that's like an example of a guy who just makes the most of the moment by being over prepared. And it's inspiring to see stuff like that.
Yeah, it's great. It takes a special person too, because he was a guy who had a little bit of success early. Brad was his coach in his first year. He started getting minutes. Brad had a belief in him. Then COVID hit. Things changed. We changed coaches. New guy came in. Ime Udoka. He was more of a defense first kind of guy, like big, physical, strong, tough defenders. So Peyton kind of fell out of the rotation a little bit. A year later, Joe Mazzulla comes in. Joe's coaching. Joe knows Peyton as an assistant coach. But we've got, at the time, Malcolm Brogdon, Marcus Smart, Derek White. He's got like good players in front of him, right? Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, the wing players. So it's not a lot of minutes. And the guy just kept working. Just kept working. And you think about like a basketball team is 15 roster spots, right? And so your impact is 1 of 15 is a lot greater than, let's say, a football team 1 of 45, but yet you expect it, right? Like, and people who have that kind of drive and that kind of work ethic and other people see it raises the standard. And for Peyton, and like, it's oxygen for him. It's breathing. Like, I don't know what that guy would do without a basketball in his hand. Honestly, it's who he is, but it's great to see. And now, he's up for NBA Sixth Man of the Year this year, and he's had an incredible year. And he hit, 2 huge baskets in the finals for us last year. And, yeah, it's good to see the payoff, but you're right. Like it takes a certain mindset to be able to persevere and stay positive and keep putting the work in, even when you're not getting the reward for it.
Yeah. Amazing. So I got some notes from your buddy Anthony Consigli, who was a prior guest on this podcast.
Yeah.
One of the things he said to me was that that you do a good job of staying in close contact and are friends with your other fellow professional sports leaders for the Bruins and the Red Sox. How do you bounce ideas off of, or how do you work with other leaders from other Boston franchises to do your job even better?
Yeah, interesting. When I got here, there was always sort of Celtics and Bruins tension and competition because they're both winter sports, and then you sort of you could see the dynamic that there were. I don't know. I guess I'd say at the lower yes, that way to say it. At the working level, there were good relationships amongst the people at the teams. But the higher up you got, the more the egos got in the way, and the more it was competition for mind share, for headlines, whatever you want to call it, ego-driven kind of stuff. I came in, I was like, okay, they aren't the competition. I don't have to steal Bruins fans and turn them into Celtics fans. Again, I've got a Boston Celtics monopoly on professional basketball in Boston and in the whole region of New England, right? So, and by the way, we work in the same building, right? They're our landlords, and then you meet the people, and they're nice people. Like the Red Sox people, I love the Red Sox people. I've had friendships over there kind of from the get-go. And the Bruins, it's interesting because early on we had some clashes. We had to kind of reset the relationship. And once it was reset and we had an alignment of incentives, like here's how the Celtics help the TD Garden and hence the Bruins, and here's how the TD Garden helps the Celtics. It allows us to help you, and it all kind of, aligns. It's been easy because it's good people, and there's always learnings because we're going through a lot of the same stuff, and it's interesting because anyone who's been in one of these jobs sort of, yeah, well, the going's good. Everyone loves you. It's all positive feedback. Hey, you're great. Pats on the back. Love the team. When it's tough is when you actually need your friends in sports. And that's when you want to reach out to them and try to lift them up a little bit and say, hey, you guys are doing the right things. It's going to come. And there are certain specific things that are sort of shop talk that we need to talk about with each other occasionally. But even more so at the NBA level, while we all kind of compete fiercely on the court, off the court, it's the opposite. It's all best practice sharing across the teams. And I've met so many great people at the league and across the teams, and I think the common denominator, is generally like, it is a labor of love for a lot of people. Not every person, but almost all the people. And certainly you can see the organizations where that's true. We're in sports. It's supposed to be fun. There's supposed to be some joy, and it's supposed to be like this. Why would you want to be in sports if those things weren't true? Because you could probably make more money elsewhere, unless you're, an athlete. And it's really been great over the years to kind of learn from others, and observe others. And then when you get a chance to try to help them with some perspective whenever it's called upon. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. Anthony also told me that you were like the guy who helped activate like the entire area around your arena and like created this new fan experience. And he said, as a construction guy, he goes, you have no idea how hard it is to get consensus when trying to do all of that type of stuff. And I find you now from our conversations before this, as well as now, as like you seem like a low ego, highly competent, easy to trust person, which just seems genuine. I don't know. Like that's the feeling I get. I'm curious, like with all of that, how you're able to get consensus with people who maybe have a variety of different incentive structures in place. Because I think this could be a potentially a portable leadership lesson beyond sports or beyond being the president of a team.
Yeah, well, I mean, first, I'd love to take the credit that Anthony's given me, but I think there are people who have more to do with that. But that's the reality of it, right? I mean, we don't own the land, so it wasn't our development to make. But we've been a partner, in the success of the TD Garden and the neighborhood and the city. And I think, I really do think a big part of it, which is easier for some than others, is you do have to put the ego aside. It's not like I don't have an ego. I've got an ego, but if you want to get something done, you've got to be able to see it from the other person's perspective. Yep. And you've got to be able to, appreciate and respect that and not just bang your head against it. Even when you don't agree with it, you have to be able to say, okay, I understand it. I get it. Like, their incentives are different than ours. Their priorities are different than ours. Their culture is different than ours. Yet, so you kind of have to find, okay, well, what brings us together, and the development of this neighborhood it's been great to see, but I sort of go back further than that when we, first bought the team and Wickham's partners bought the team. And one of my first jobs was to try to get a new lease for the Celtics, because the one we were in, we couldn't look at it and say it's going to get us where we want to go. And there were some pain points in it for the TD Garden in Delaware North and the Bruins as well. But I'll tell you what, there were years and years of just clashing between the organizations, just leveraging each other where they could. It's like, this lease allows us to inflict pain on each other, but doesn't really align our incentives such that we can actually have success together. And that was sort of so we went through like a bit of, I call it like a disarmament. Like, we had me and another guy have like weekly meetings away from the office just to go sit and talk through like how do we get this to a different place. I'm like, I'm not Red Auerbach, you're not Harry Sinden. Like we don't have to fight the battles that are being fought for 40 years here. We can just sort of say what would make this better for both of us, and let's kind of try to dial in on that. And the good news for me was I came out of tech, I had no history. So I didn't have the scar tissue that maybe would have prevented me from looking at it that way. So I don't know, like I try to think you have to first, as they say, sort of, it's the Sun Tzu, seek first to understand and then to be understood. You take that approach to things and it tends to help a little bit.
So good. Rich, I really appreciate your time being here, especially in the middle of the playoffs. One more question before we run though, and you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but I'd like to maybe bring it home even now. For that person who's a bit earlier in their career, who wants to leave a positive dent in the world like you're currently doing, but they're not exactly sure how or where or what they're going to do. What are some general pieces of life/career advice you give to them?
Yeah, it's interesting because I sort of I hesitate to try to get, everyone's different. I hesitate to try to, with my own children, I hesitate to try to say, hey, here's how you got to think about this. I try to tell people, I'm like, younger people, you have to have self-belief. It's got to start there. Like if you believe in yourself, right? And if you can solve for that, like if you really say, all right, I believe in my ability, I believe in my ability to get where I want to go, to have a positive impact, to do things in the world, you can. But if you gotta, don't let that get chipped away at, and it can. There's a lot of things that chip away at it, particularly for younger people the last, 5 years or so, 10 years. It's been a difficult environment, certainly a different environment than certainly what I grew up with, and probably what you did as well, Ryan. I can't walk in everyone's shoes, but I think it starts with that self-belief. And then I think I always say you got to sort of be able to answer, maybe this is a self-belief thing, the question of just like, why me? So if you're across the table from someone, whether it's a job interview or just a get to know you conversation, informational, or even if it's just someone who's in a role or in an industry that you're interested in, you want that person to leave that conversation feeling better than they did before it started. And you want them to sort of have some insight into you that would allow them to say, hey, I like this person and here's why I like this person, and there's a lot of job advice you could give people about networking, but I think fundamentally, when you get that at bat, wherever it might occur, like you've got to be able to willing to share something about yourself. You want to, people call it vulnerability these days. I'm just so give people a peek, let them see who you are a little bit. So that helps people connect with you, and if they can connect with you, they're more likely to say, I want to give this person an opportunity. And it's hard. Like I didn't have anyone telling me that when I was coming up, and I'm not sure. I think I feel like I got lucky with a couple of people who saw that in me. Maybe, when I didn't know I had it. But I feel like that's where it starts.
Yeah, I love it. It's like you mentioned it earlier, but if you like intentionally go into every interaction with a person to leave them better than you found them, to add value to their life, that answers some of that why me. They're going to say, I want that rich guy around. In fact, I just bought the Boston Celtics. Now everybody's telling me I need this rich guy to come run the show. I'm going to call him, right? Because I'm guessing, right? And you didn't even say this, but I'm guessing those people who told Wick that were people that you routinely added value to their lives. You performed, you had high character, right? High competence, all the things that develop trust. And then that obviously earns results as well. And and then that gets people talking positively behind your back. I think that's like an aspirational thing for all of us to think about, is how can I intentionally leave each person better than I found them, add value to their life. You do that over and over and over, and that just becomes kind of intuitively the way you operate. Probably good things are going to happen, right? Probably good things will happen for you.
Yeah, and I'm reticent to sort of give anyone a how-to, or like, hey, do what I did kind of thing, because listen, we all find our own path, I guess, but yeah, I do think you can, and this is funny. Particularly when I meet a younger person, you're doing Zoom interviews, or I do a ton of informational interviewing for kids coming out of college who think they want to get into sports, and I just remember the ones who just made me smile or laugh a little bit. And it's not always because they told a joke. It's just something that they said or shared that resonated with me a little bit. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I like that. There's something there. And that's different than someone who is just kind of going through the motions. And I think when you're young, it's, if you're lucky, you've got mentors who've been around you, people that you've observed, in your family or in your, close circle, who you could say, I want to be more like that person. But most people don't have like someone to say, hey, here's how you got to do this. And even if they do, you got to be who you are, right? So I think you got to find it in yourself a little bit. And hope you do have enough people that you've been able to look around and say, hey, I wish I was more like that person,
Yeah, so good. Well, again, Rich, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you to our mutual friend, Anthony Consigli, for making this introduction. He's the best.
Guy. Yeah.
He's the best. How do you guys know each other, by the way?
We played Pop Warner football together.
Are you serious?
Yeah. He went on to play college football at Harvard, and I did not. Yeah, the Consigli family is a big family in Milford, the town we grew up in together. So we knew each other when we were young. We were on the wrestling team in high school together, and he's done amazingly well for himself. Talk about taking a business that was like a local business and turning it into an amazing business. And because I have friends who are employed there, like guys I went to high school with, who work there now, and they're like, Anthony's just been great to me and to my family, and how they treat people. In a business where it's not, construction's not for the soft, right? But they've really done a great job, and I'm glad Anthony connected the two of us.
Yeah, me too. Well, I would love, Rich, to continue our dialogue as we both progress. A lot of big things happening in the future for you too. I'm excited and would love to talk more as we go, man.
That's great, Brian. It's really great getting to know you a little bit, and happy to do it anytime.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, be well. Take care.